All right. Hey there, students. Tom Ritchie here, and time for a little APUSH review. As Kaya says, yes, this is APUSH. Okay, this one is for APUSH, and we've got here, let me make sure, yeah, we've got everybody in this session, Civil War and Reconstruction. Now, y'all remember, if you were on YouTube, go ahead and click in the, in the video description. Join us here on Crowdcast. These are the people that I'm actually interacting with. Every once in a while, I may check the YouTube chat, but if you're in APUS history, definitely a good idea to go to Crowdcast, where you're going to be able to interact with me, answer polls, ask questions, upvote questions, and the like. Now, with that, let me go ahead and close some tabs from the previous session here. And one tab that I won't close right now is let me go ahead and show you. We've got Marco Learning student support. Now, I'm going to be broadcasting for free every Monday until the exam, and I will keep going until the other exams as well. Like somebody was asking me, I'm on track to get this partially done. We won't get all 9 units done before the paper pencil exam, but at the same time, I don't think that we'll have to. I don't think that there's going to be a lot now. This is just a guess, but an educated guess, I think, but based on my experience with the College Board in the past, but I don't think the paper pencil exam is going to have a lot of post-World War II stuff on it. Is Viviki here? Is somebody saying, hey? So with that, just make sure that we're thinking about that. This is going to be on Unit 5, the Civil War and Reconstruction. Now, remember, on top of all these Monday evening broadcasts, I am offering student support, which Marco Learning's offering student support in a lot of subjects. Okay, so we've got here 8 different subjects where Marco Learning is offering student support. Okay, so if you want more information on that. Now, as far as that goes, also, you should be able to use the code Richie30. If you try to use the code Richie30 and it doesn't work, email support@marcolearning.com. Okay, so that is Richie30. Now, with that, ladies and gentlemen, that's a word from our sponsor, and we will go on with what we got here. All right, and Miss Skinner students are here. Great to see. And so with this, okay, so we'll just go ahead and the question, the topic was the Civil War and Reconstruction. So we've got our thing here was the prohibitionist movement a part of the progressive movement. That's the #1 question right now. So let's go ahead and do that. And my answer to that question is yes. Okay, that's an easy question to answer. That the prohibitionist movement, this is part of progressives' commitment to both scientific principles and moral reform. Okay, so basically, that the government can be an agent of moral reform, and then remember a commitment to scientific principles. I mean, the thing is, a lot of people like to drink alcohol, but it's not good for you per se. Okay, it's just it's really not. Alcohol is not something that's healthy. Now, of course, the progressives thought, well, if it's unhealthy and it causes people to be lazy or to to beat their wives and other things like that, well, if some people get addicted to it, then we might as well just just get rid of it, make it illegal. Okay, so as far as that goes, that's the progressive mindset. But we'll talk about the progressives in a future session. Okay, so we'll definitely get there. So with that, Amanda, I'm kind of a one-man show, okay? So when it comes down to it, I've got some things here and there. Now, one thing I might be able to find here, causes of the Civil War. Let's see if I've got something here that I've got in terms of, let's see where we are. Okay, so I want to see if I can find something that okay, so as far as that goes, actually, I've got something that is on Google Drive that could be helpful. Let me go ahead and give y'all a link to this and make sure that I've got, let's see here. All right. Let me just, these are just some random notes, but I think that, I don't know, I'll just go ahead and put that there. Let's see. So going from there, let's say, okay, let's see. Okay. Okay, so let me go ahead and share this with y'all. This is something those of you in the Crowdcast who are here live, I'm going to say, anybody with the link can view. And basically, I go into different causes of the Civil War. Okay, now the Google Drive here, I'm going to go ahead and put this into the chat for those of you in Crowdcast. Y'all are able to open up, this Google Drive sheet that I've basically gone into some of these things. Now, one thing I'm going to note here is the causes of the Civil War. It gets, it's definitely something that in pop culture has become a very, very polarizing, kind of thing, where people are just, arguing. We've seen a lot of, a lot of controversy over Confederate monuments and the like, for example. Now, as far as this goes, though, when we're talking about like APUSH and we're talking about studying the Civil War at a college level and looking at causation in general, okay? So when we think about, like, for example, complex understanding on the DBQ, complex understanding, it is partly an appreciation for different perspectives, okay? So when people say, typically, what you're going to hear from people about causes of the Civil War, depending on where they stand on things, is either slavery, states' rights, or or sectional economic differences. Okay. And if you look at, like, for example, the US citizenship test, those are the three that are going to come up there. What are three causes of the Civil War? Now, in pop culture, people just like to debate all of these things. One has to be right, the other has to be wrong. When we get into complex understanding, it's a matter of understanding all of the different arguments that are there. Okay. So all of these different arguments, understanding these arguments and thinking in terms of, okay, which one of these do I find most credible? So if we're writing a DBQ for complex understanding, now y'all keeping, those of you in the Crowdcast, y'all stay on the lookout for an email from me. At some point, I will be doing a DBQ walkthrough premium session. And so I'll be sending out some things there. So with that, if the stream is not loading, let's see, refresh your browser. Okay, so refresh your browser. Is it working for most of you? Y'all just let me know there. Make sure that we're, yeah, so y'all are actually hearing me there because y'all are commenting on some things that I've said. So with that, it's, which one of these causes do I find to be most credible? And then let me show that I understand that other causes that are advanced about the Civil War are not without merit. Okay, that is complex understanding, being able to say, and of course, that also contributes to civil discourse, that even though this is my point of view that's, on this issue, that I also understand other, what other people have argued. Okay. So as far as that goes, I've got a few things here. I don't know why, these are some tutoring notes that I've done here. So as far as that goes, what was the Civil War principally about? Okay. And when I say principally, I'm thinking in terms of, what was the primary cause of the Civil War, but also remember that when we're thinking about complex understanding, you want to understand a secondary cause, that to say that, slavery was the only cause, or this was only about secession and state versus states' rights, this is not something that has a lot of complexity. So what we note here is, for somebody arguing slavery, they would note here that the southern states seceded, from the Union, or I would say at least the states of the Deep South. Okay, so the states of the Deep South, okay, so South, that initially formed the Confederate States of America. Because when we get to the Upper South, that actually gets a little bit more complicated when you look at states like, Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas, that these states actually had, some other reasons for seceding after Fort Sumter. But as far as that goes, the states of the Deep South that initially formed the Confederate States of America seceded from the Union in order to protect slavery. And the Confederacy started the civil, so the attack on Fort, the Civil War began, so basically the Civil War, began with, let's see, began with the Confederate attack on Fort Sumter. And so with that when we look at the 1850s, for example, slavery was the catalyst of nearly every explosive confrontation. So when we're thinking about the Compromise of 1850, Bleeding Kansas, the Brooks Sumner incident, John Brown's raid, all of these things here where you're looking at these things, this is, slavery is the single most explosive issue of the 1850s. And so we want to note that attitudes towards slavery polarized during the antebellum period. So northern attitudes are hardening against it. Now note here, we want to understand the nuances between abolitionism and free soil. Whereas abolitionism is something that is, let's get rid of slavery right now everywhere. Then free soil says, what, slavery in Alabama, Florida, whatever states where it exists, whatever, not my problem. But slavery in the West, no. Okay, that there are people that they want, the free soilers, they want the West to be reserved generally for free white people. And so in order to secure a white West, they don't want slavery expanding from the South. Now, this is something for any of y'all who've gotten into the Cold War, free soil, it's an interesting comparison you could make with, for example, the containment of communism. Free soilers believe that slavery is evil. They just believe it's something that should be contained, because let's not forget that slavery is not just driving the Southern economy at this time. Slavery is also indirectly driving the national economy at this time. And so in the North, there's not, even the 1850s, a large amount of support for, just abolishing slavery outright. Remember, the 1860 Republican platform that Abraham Lincoln ran on was not an abolitionist platform. It was a free soil platform. Lincoln said as late as 1862, and that's what I'll get into in the second part, is as late as 1862, Lincoln himself adamantly asserted he's fighting to preserve the Union. Slavery was not his primary objective. So, but when we look at this, white Southerners began talking, building defenses for slavery, defending the institution as a positive good. So we see here that these sectional attitudes between 1820 and 1860 are very much hardening. Okay. And so as far as that goes, we also note here, if we're looking at Deep South secession declarations, typically, the Mississippi secession declaration is, one of the most blatant and adamant, that they start off saying, yes, basically this secession is principally about slavery. And so when people are arguing that the Civil War is about slavery, these are the primary things that they're arguing. And so with that, the secession of the Southern states and the subsequent formation of the Confederate States of America. Now, this is, according to advocates of secession, okay, the subsequent formation, were neither illegal, were not seen, like, to make this, these are tutoring notes, so I'm kind of cleaning these up a little bit, were seen, okay, by, basically by Southern political leaders, so basically we're seen by Confederate leaders as being neither illegal nor an act of war. Okay, so as far as this, the Union began the Civil War as a war against secession to preserve the Union. What we'll note here is to preserve the Union, not as a, as far as that goes against secession, believing secession to be an unconstitutional. Oh, okay, I'll keep that in mind. Okay, let's see. So to be an unconstitutional insurrection. Okay, so against federal authority. Okay, so basically that's what the Union is beginning the Civil War believing secession to be an unconstitutional insurrection against federal authority. So with that, that is the, now again, I don't really like the term states' rights. Okay, like when states' rights is really such a problematic term, the way it's used in the discourse, that typically for someone making this argument, I typically council that this is a secession war. Okay, so this is either about slavery or it's about secession / states' rights. Now, when it comes down to it, these explanations, just like if we're talking about, World War I, World War II, several explanations go together to paint a fuller picture. If somebody's saying that the Civil War was about secession, they're not necessarily saying that it wasn't all about slavery or that slavery had nothing to do with it. So again, if you're going for complex understanding, I think you should avoid, some of these pop culture traps that people can be brought into. If we look at the course and exam description, if we're looking at the course and exam description for APUS history, okay, so the Civil War, let's see what we've got here. Military conflict, the Civil War. Oh, oops, I've added something to it. Okay, so start over there. All right, so when we're looking at what does this have to do here? Okay, so what we see here in the course and exam description, just to make this clear, is that intensified by expansion and deepening regional divisions. Now, note here as well, it's also the westward expansion is what is bringing about this conflict. If it hadn't been for manifest destiny and the expansion west, they're large. Odds are if we'd had a civil war, it wouldn't be the same civil war because a lot of this debate was about the expansion of slavery. So debates over slavery and other economic, cultural, and political issues led the nation into civil war. Okay, so you see here ideological and economic differences over slavery, debates over slavery became to dominate the political discussion. So as far as that goes, the course and exam description mentions debates over slavery, but also leaves it open for somebody to offer other explanations for the American Civil War. So going from here, as far as that goes, this is something that basically that the Confederates did not intend to go to war against the United States. Now, that is the thing, that the terminology Civil War is actually, Lincoln's terminology, and Lincoln actually, won that debate there. If we look up the Confederate States of America, you'll see that what it's branded as is an unrecognized state. Okay, so this is, unrecognized state. Basically, that it claims to be a state, but it is not generally recognized. That's one of the biggest failures of the Confederacy, was to secure diplomatic recognition from Britain and France. So the Confederacy, an unrecognized state. The Confederates claim that this is, these are two countries fighting. Lincoln says in the Gettysburg Address, no, this is one nation. Okay, and so that is really, like, for Lincoln, like when we talk about how Lincoln, is getting into, the war to preserve the Union. Okay, that for Lincoln, if any of y'all are coming from AP Euro and you think about nationalism, this is something that is, very much present here on a global, scale, that we see, nationalist movements at this time in Europe. You definitely see competing visions here of American nationalism. And so noting here that, while these states of the Deep South seceded over slavery, the 1860 Republican platform, it said states have a right to control their own domestic institutions. Now, then the Civil War being about Lincoln's call for truce. So going from there are some things here. Now, also, when you're looking at the causes, you also want to look afterwards. Okay. And so when you see here that Lincoln, at the end of the Civil War, he did not place any requirements on the former Confederate states other than to emancipate slaves and form unionist governments. Okay, so you don't see until the radical Republicans take power, emphasis on black suffrage, political equality, economic relief, things like this. Which, note that in Reconstruction, economic relief never really is realized. Okay, the Freedmen's Bureau existed, but it was constantly underfunded until Congress finally abolished it in the 1870s, or discontinued it, or whatever that was in particular. Now, also, the third option that you don't typically hear of as much, but, was very prevalent in the historical discourse and historiography in the early 20th century is sectional economic differences. Basically, you've got the industrializing North and the stubbornly cash crop agricultural South, where the South is really, they're making so much money on cash crops and cotton agriculture that they are really not investing in industry. Of course, when you want to fight a war, Hamilton is definitely better at war making than Jefferson. And so that's definitely something that comes out during the American Civil War. So when you look at these sectional economic differences, the North is industrializing. Now, another thing when you're looking at during the Civil War, Congress passed the Morrill Tariff, very soon after the formation of the Confederate States of America. As soon as the votes were available, the tariff went way up. Okay, so when people are making tariff arguments, this is an argument not so much as why the South seceded, but why the North is fighting the war in the first place. Okay, and so when you look at this, if we're looking at causation, we also want to think about the effects. Okay, and so when you look at, for example, slavery, when somebody says, well, the Civil War wasn't about slavery. Well, why is it that the 13th Amendment was passed after the Civil War to abolish slavery? The Civil War wasn't about states' rights. Well, why is it that the 14th Amendment puts some restrictions on the states? Like, one thing here, that the 14th Amendment says no state shall. Okay, and then of course the 15th Amendment is the first of the amendments that is going to regulate voting rights from a federal level. This is the first time that the federal government puts into the Constitution, with the approval of enough states, that you cannot deny the right to vote based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Now, the other thing here is when we look at economics. Now, the economics, this is the least interesting. Okay, that's the thing that basically one of the things about these, about these three causes is slavery is definitely the most interesting and the most explosive. States' rights states' rights take some, a bit more like, political theorizing and stuff like that. Economics, this is going to make you yawn and put you to sleep, which is why, you don't hear a lot of people talking about it anymore. But the thing is, for the next 50 years, the United States had consistently high protective tariffs, which worked to the disadvantage of the agricultural sector. So as far as this goes, remember again, complex understanding is about taking these different perspectives on the Civil War and really studying them and coming to the conclusion that I find that this one is the most credible, that this one is number one, and this one I think would be a second, and perhaps this one might be a distant third. Okay, so when you're thinking about that, if you were doing a DBQ, it's best if you're familiar with three different causes of something. So you want to understand how you will make arguments, and then also how you would present evidence of these arguments. Okay, so these are the three that you are most, that you're most likely to see here. Now, also, we want to note here that before the Civil War, it was common to refer to the United States in the plural. The United States are. Now, today, we tend to refer to the United States as the United States is. So that's something I think that is, is very important when we're thinking about what is the legacy of the Civil War. Okay, one of the legacies of the Civil War is that we remember, when we go back to the Federalist Papers and the ratification of the Constitution, that this is something that during the ratification of the Constitution, it was seen as, anathema, just to say like, oh, we want to have a national government. But when it comes down to it, the United States has definitely become more of a nation as the result of the Civil War. So, when people say, people talk about, states' rights or something like that, for example, this is the Civil War definitely did have an impact there. So with that, Dred Scott versus Sanford and the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into this here. Okay, so Dred Scott and the Kansas-Nebraska Act. So I'm going to take y'all for a little walk through the 1850s. How about that? So with this, so there is a document already. Thank y'all. And y'all are free to, keep that link or copy that link into something that, that you control or something like that. And so let me run in here. Let's see, APUSH. Let's see, the Crisis of the Union. And let's open up the 1850s, the road to Civil War. All right. So going from there, let me make sure I've got some things closed out so my computer doesn't, I don't have a blue screen of death, coming up all of a sudden. Just close some things out that aren't being used there. All right. So the road to Civil War. All right. So as far as that goes, that, the Compromise of 1850, I've actually got I've got a lecture and a rap on that. So that's on YouTube. I would encourage y'all to look at those. Okay. So the Compromise of 1850 happens. Now, one of the things out of the Compromise of 1850, the most explosive and controversial provision here is the stronger Fugitive Slave Law. Okay, so the stronger Fugitive Slave Law, this is something that, there was a Fugitive Slave Law in 1793. The 1850 law ends up, the 1850 law ends up superseding that law, and it puts the federal government into, in charge. Now, this is the other thing that I don't like about saying that the Civil War was about states' rights, for example, that it was actually, there are cases where the Republicans are the ones, the anti-slavery people in the 1850s are the ones that are arguing for states' rights. That the stronger Fugitive Slave Law actually brings in the prosecution of fugitive slaves. It makes it a suspected fugitive slaves, it makes it a federal responsibility rather than a state responsibility. So what we want to note here is when people say the Civil War is about states' rights, well, which right? Okay, and particularly secession. Does a state have the right to secede? Because in this case, it was the people who want, it was the pro-slavery people who wanted the federal government to take over, the trials of accused fugitive slaves. Now, remember, this is something that was a bench trial, okay? So you went in front of a magistrate rather than a jury. So with that, when we go into this, you've got Franklin Pierce, who is elected president in 1852. Now, Franklin Pierce, is from New Hampshire, but he was what they called at that time a doughface, okay? So he was a Democratic politician from New England who was, who was very sympathetic to the South and the expansion of slavery. Now, even during the Civil War, Franklin Pierce wrote a few things. You can find some letters from Franklin Pierce where he is actually expressing sympathy with the Confederate States of America and the secession of the Confederate States, particularly. And so Pierce is president when the Kansas-Nebraska Act. So doughface is a northern politician with a southern agenda. And so the Kansas-Nebraska Act is passed. Now, of course, you've got the Free Soil movement. Now, remember, when you look at this Free Soil cartoon, it's not the black man who is portrayed as a victim. It is this it's this Western white farmer who is portrayed as a victim of these Democratic politicians that are trying to, make him live with black people. So this is one thing to note about Free Soilers. Part of the reason why Free Soil was more popular is it didn't appeal to morality the same way that abolitionism did. It appealed to racism, at that time. And so you can see in a cartoon like this. Now, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, what it did was it repealed the Missouri Compromise, pretty much. So in the sense that the Missouri Compromise, remember, it said that anything that was north of 3630 is going to be free territory in the Louisiana Purchase. And so what happens here is that the Kansas-Nebraska Act places all this under popular sovereignty. Now, this basically obliterates the Missouri Compromise. Now, remember, the idea of popular sovereignty had been tried with the Compromise of 1850, but the Kansas-Nebraska Act says, let's try it over here. And this becomes a disaster. Now, Stephen Douglas was a Northern Democrat from Illinois who had presidential aspirations. He also wanted to organize the Kansas and Nebraska territories because he wanted to build a transcontinental railroad. And so those territories needed to be organized. Now, the thing is, seemed like, okay, this is going to work okay, but then bleeding Kansas. What happens here is when popular sovereignty was applied out here, it wasn't such a big deal because people didn't want to go out there with no air conditioning or anything. It was far away. And so you'd have to take the Santa Fe Trail and all of that. But now that you've got Kansas, what happens here is there are, on one hand, border ruffians, these pro-slavery settlers from Missouri, who just basically jump over the border to vote. And then you've got anti-slavery settlers coming from as far away as New England. And so you have acts of violence committed by both sides. Beecher's Bibles. Now, Henry Ward Beecher, who was actually, Beecher was a preacher, and he was, actually, I believe was he the brother of Harriet Beecher Stowe? Close relative, but I believe her brother, that Harriet Beecher Stowe, of course, wrote this anti-slavery novel, Uncle Tom's Cabin. Well, Henry Ward Beecher was a New England preacher, and he would send rifles. He would send rifles to Kansas so that anti-slavery settlers could defend themselves. And so, you see here that pro-slavery settlers, they burned the city of the town of Lawrence, Kansas, which was an anti-slavery settlement. Now, one thing to note here is the sack of Lawrence. This is something, especially some of the things that we've seen happening in the United States over the past year, that what we see here is there was only one person killed, and that person that was killed was a pro-slavery settler. So this was basically, they burned down, the settlement, but at the same time, the only person killed here was one of the pro-slavery settlers. But John Brown decides, you know what, the sack of Lawrence, somebody's got to pay for it. And John Brown, who, is a great example of how, you can do very bad things in defense of a good cause. You can take the best cause and you can do some very bad things, in defense of it. So John Brown gets his sons together and says, like, you know what? We're going to find some pro-slavery settlers, and it doesn't matter whether they had anything to do with the sack of Lawrence or not. We're just going to go find them. They went and found a homestead, and they told all the men to come outside. The tearful mother cried, and she was able to bring her youngest boy inside, but the other men in the house weren't so lucky. They were, one of them was hacked to pieces with a broadsword. And so John Brown and his sons kill these people in retaliation for the sack of Lawrence. So this gets really ugly in Kansas. There is a New Deal era mural that is still in the Kansas State House. So with that, you've got these, this continuing violence. You've got at least 50 people dead in bleeding Kansas over 4 years. And, you've got these conflicting constitutions, the Lecompton Constitution, the pro-slavery Constitution, and the Topeka Constitution. Now, just a moment for Harambe, and another moment for the Whig Party. Okay, so as far as that goes, the Whig Party, I think I've actually got a little animation effect. Yeah, so basically the Whig Party. Now Henry Clay is already dead by that point, but we associate him with the Whig Party. That Clay had a very devastating loss in the 1852 presidential election, and the Kansas-Nebraska Act basically tears apart the Whig Party. Okay, and so essentially what happens is Southern Whigs tend to become Democrats. The Republican Party is founded in 1864 as a coalition of Northern Whigs and Free Soil Democrats. Okay, so that's what you're seeing here as far as the foundation of the Republican Party. Now, again, there are abolitionists in the Republican Party, but the Republican Party is a free soil party, not an abolitionist party as far as their platform. So, of course, the Brooks-Sumner incident is always very, very interesting there. And in 1856, okay, you see here, of course, there's the whole immigration with the Know Nothing Party and the Catholics, against the Catholic immigrants. But in 1856, James Buchanan of Pennsylvania was elected, and someone else who was something of a doughface. You know, he was generally friendly to Southern interests. He said that the Dred Scott decision hadn't been announced, but he said the Supreme Court's about to announce a decision. Let's make sure that we're all, faithful to it or whatever. So the Dred Scott decision, Dred Scott had been a slave who had lived with his master in Illinois, in the free state of Illinois, and in the free territory of Wisconsin for 4 years. Dred Scott says, I am, that makes me a free man. I lived for, I didn't just travel through free territory in a free state, but I actually lived there. And the Supreme Court says, well, and this is one of the most tragic, applications of judicial activism, where basically there are these judges who are superimposing their own, their own way of looking at things over the Constitution. Like, the Constitution never says that people of African descent can't be citizens, or that citizenship is in any way tied to race. And so as far as that goes, the Dred Scott decision, the majority of the Supreme Court says people of African descent, they can't be U.S. citizens. They use some kind of pseudo originalism to come up with this. It's nowhere in the text of the Constitution. I've checked. And so then Congress can't forbid slavery in federal territories. So Congress can't forbid slavery in federal territories. And so basically, since Congress can't forbid slavery in federal territories, only in states, the Missouri Compromise, or what's left of it, is unconstitutional. And of course, the Lincoln-Douglas debates, Dred Scott is really the contextualization there, that Lincoln is a free soiler. Stephen Douglas is for popular sovereignty. Now, during this time, Lincoln is, of course, against the Dred Scott decision, the House divided speech. You see here where one of the words used most is decision. So Dred Scott, the Dred Scott decision, And so Lincoln, in the House divided speech, he's advancing an argument, sort of a slippery slope kind of thing, where he says, well, the Supreme Court, they're saying today that you can't have, that a territory cannot be a free territory. What's to stop the Supreme Court from ruling tomorrow that you can't have a free state? And that's where Lincoln says that, we're either eventually, now Lincoln doesn't say it's going to happen now, but Lincoln says eventually we're going to be all slave or all free. Now, of course, this speech, scares a lot of members of the Southern political class. Now, another thing that Lincoln does to Douglas is he backs him into a corner, because Republicans are seen, they're mischaracterized at that time by the Democrats as, race mixers and the like. But then, Lincoln is going to take Douglas and back him into a corner about Dred Scott. And so, as far as that goes, Lincoln is, and Lincoln was very effective at this, by the way. The Lincoln-Douglas debates did a lot to change people's views of the Republican Party. Now, of course, Lincoln also made some statements, to get that perception there, making it clear that he was against racial equality and the like. But with this, Lincoln's like, okay, let me back him into a corner about Dred Scott. So with this, Lincoln, the Freeport Doctrine, that essentially Lincoln asks Stephen Douglas, I was about to say Frederick Douglass, wrong Douglas. There were a couple of California politicians fought a duel over that, that they're the only sitting senator ever killed in a duel. It was in the 1850s. And one of these politicians said to the other that you're following the wrong Douglas. And that resulted in a duel in which a sitting U.S. senator was killed. So with that, that's probably not going to be on the exam, but just a bit of trivia for you. So the Freeport Doctrine, basically, Abraham Lincoln, asked Stephen Douglas, can people in a territory, can they say that we don't want slavery in our immediate community? And so basically, Stephen Douglas is backed into a corner because in order to win the Senate race, Stephen Douglas can't wholeheartedly support Dred Scott. But Stephen Douglas wants to run for president. And Stephen Douglas is like, wait, if I don't, I mean, he's in this dilemma. I mean, Lincoln is really just such a brilliant debater because Douglas, if he doesn't support Dred Scott, Southern Democrats are not going to support him for president in 1860. And, then if he wholeheartedly supports Dred Scott, then he risks losing his Senate seat. And so with this, he comes to the conclusion of, people living in a territory. Okay. People living in a territory could be prevented by the refusal of people living in that territory to pass laws, favorable to slavery. So basically, if the people of the territory support slavery, they would pass legislation. And so he's really trying to kind of kick the can here, but Southern political leaders are not fooled. Southern political leaders basically just they cancel Stephen Douglas, and that's part of what leads to part of what's going to lead to the election of 1860, where Stephen Douglas, even though he got 29% of the popular vote, he only gets 12 electoral votes, gets Missouri and a handful of votes from New Jersey. And so you see here where you've got, the Southern Democratic candidate, even though he only got 13% of the vote, or 18% of the vote there, if I'm not mistaken. So 18% of the vote, he gets a pretty significant portion of the electoral vote. So note here that Lincoln wins the presidency his first time with 40% of the vote, which is interesting there. And of course, Lincoln's election is the immediate cause of Deep South secession. So no matter what people say about underlying causes, the immediate cause of Deep South secession is Abraham Lincoln's election in 1860, and Abraham Lincoln being the first president elected without the support of a single slave state. Okay, so as far as that goes, that when we're going to oh yes, now also let's do Instagram shout outs. Now I'm on Instagram at Tom Ritchie, so go ahead and follow me if you'd like to. Most of y'all probably already are following me there. And then also at Harambe Movie. That's something. After the exams are over, actually, I do plan on doing a fundraiser for this movie. This at Harambe Movie on Instagram, they want to make like a documentary about Harambe's life, but that also addresses like the problems of animal captivity. And it's got like all of these like original like photos of Harambe. And so with that is, oh my goodness, me and the boys walking into McDonald's to order 66 McNuggets. So with that, so going from there, it looks like a really interesting project that I'm going to do more to promote after AP exams are over. But at Harambe Movie, great, great account to follow there. So as far as that goes, I think we have. So what we'll notice here, Suha, we've got a quick question here. So going from this, what necessarily weakened the 15th Amendment? Okay, so the 15th Amendment, so that's, I'm glad to do whatever I can. I've done a fundraiser for the Cincinnati Zoo the past couple of years on the anniversary of Harambe's death, but this time I'm going to do it to raise money for this documentary that is really, just looks like it's doing some great things to raise awareness about not just like the death of Harambe, but where how he was treated in captivity. As well. And so with this, what weakened the 15th Amendment? Okay, so what weakened the 15th Amendment? What we want to note here, and thank you, Ruby, and let's see, Nacho Baroys and Mr. Felora, and then Divvy. Okay, so Divya, thank y'all so much. All right, thank y'all so much for for your help here and support. So with that, that when we look at this, what weakened the 15th Amendment? So basically, the 15th Amendment, what said that you cannot stop someone from voting. A state cannot stop someone from voting because of race, color, and previous condition of servitude. Well, what happens is during Jim Crow, there are a lot of Southern states that responded by Well, you know what? The Constitution doesn't say that you can't tell someone they can't vote because they can't read, or because their grandfather couldn't vote, or because they didn't pay a poll tax. And so when you think about those things, it's like, okay, basically the 15th Amendment, strictly constructed, just says you can't tell somebody you can't vote because you're black, or you can't vote because you used to be a slave, or something like that. But you can say, okay, you can say that you can't vote because, oh, doesn't look like you paid your poll tax, and you can't pay it today. You had to pay it already. Or your grandfather could vote, right? Your grandfather was a property white man. All right, you don't have to pay your poll tax. You've got the grandfather clause. You're exempt. Even today, we go into, even today we get into, like, the phrase grandfathered in. Grandfathered in is a phrase that's still used today when you are exempt from a certain requirement that an organization has because you have had a previous association with that organization. So, and that, like building codes or whatever, like when they change the building codes, houses that were built before a certain time, they're grandfathered in. They don't necessarily, you don't have to adapt your house to those codes in order to, live in it or sell it. So with that, why didn't the federal government do any action to stop this? Note that the radical Republicans, they lose control of Congress in the early 1870s. That the Democrats, what happens here is there's an economic panic. Okay, in the 1870s, the economy tanks. Okay, even though there's a lot of growth during the Gilded Age, there's a share of boom and bust. Okay, and so as far as that goes, that when we're looking at this, there's some boom and bust. So there was an economic panic. Then, there was a lot of political corruption. So, for example, if you go to, like, there is a whole Wikipedia page that is dedicated to Grant administration scandals. Okay, there is, when you look here, Grant administration scandals. And while President Grant might not have been personally tied to any of these, I mean, we've got like 12 distinct scandals. We've got a scandal summary table. So the thing is, people are, tired of political corruption, and the Democratic Party is promising to address political corruption. Samuel Tilden, when he ran for president in 1876, he was the person who broke the Tweed ring, which was that political machine that was operating in New York City. And so with that we see here that, all of this stuff here that's going on during this time. Now, of course, the Tweed ring was a Democratic operation, but at the same time, Samuel Tilden played a role in breaking the Tweed ring. So although, yeah, there were definitely some corrupt, like, local political machines that were at work at that time, but the Republican Party had basically been in, even you've got some infighting there. Charles Sumner, a fellow Republican, is accusing Grant in 1872. He's accusing Grant of practicing nepotism. Now, also, there gets to be a degree of exhaustion with radical Reconstruction in the predominantly white North. Understand that before World War I, the Northern population was 95% white. Or more. It was at least 95% white. No free state really had like over 5% black population. And so, even voters in the North are not really, necessarily caring, how black people are treated in the South and what rights they have. So the radical Republicans, they're in power for a certain amount of time, but after the Compromise of 1877 and Southern states begin, passing laws that indirectly disenfranchise black citizens, and the Supreme Court basically says that there's just, we're not going to do anything about that. Okay, that doesn't directly violate the Constitution. We've got Plessy v. Ferguson, separate but equal. You see. So with that, what we're seeing here is, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and, cut this off. Now, y'all remember, look for some emails from me. And we've also got, if any of y'all are interested on, in Marco Learning student support, that is there for you as well. But thank y'all for coming to, this review session. And I look forward to seeing y'all again next week at 9 p.m. Eastern. And remember to check your email now and then. Follow me on, Instagram, for occasional announcements of what's coming on. And thank you, Lindsay Bernard and Olivia X. Becker, for your recent Instagram follows. It is always a pleasure. All right, and great. So thank y'all, Vicky and Raul. Y'all are always here, and I sure appreciate that for y'all, you and your students supporting these broadcasts.